Okay, hello everyone. I'm just going to do a really quick whistle-stop tour through paper 2. If at any point you have any questions, or if anything I've said doesn't sound absolutely right, please do stop me, and please do try and ask. The advantage of having this on a video is that you can pause it, and you can go at your own pace. So if at any point you feel like you need to redraft anything, or if any of the questions absolutely doesn't make sense, then use your time now. This isn't supposed to be a complete sort of absolutely everything guide to doing it, because I just don't have the time, but it should hopefully give you a bit of an indication as to where the marks are supposed to come from. So first things first, well done to everyone except for one person who managed to get their name on the front cover. Please write your name on your work. It makes it so much easier for me to give you any marks at all. Okay, in terms of answering multiple choice, I should have marked the correct answer on your work, but we were looking for B, inheritance and the environment. So phenotype is the result of the combined effect of the inheritance and the environment. If nothing else, then just go via process of elimination. You know it's not the genotype in evolution, because evolution isn't something that influences the phenotype. Evolution is just genotype. You know it's not about neurotransmitters, because a genotype will create neurotransmitters. It's not got anything to do specifically with the way that a gene is expressed. You know that, again, if it's not neurotransmitters or environment, then or if it's not neurotransmitters, it's not going to have an influence on our phenotype. So it must be inheritance and the environment. Important thing to note as well, if you are answering multiple choice, that is all you need to do. They are scanned electronically, which means anything else that you add is going to be an issue. It's not going to make anything any clearer. So if you start doing this, the machine sees that as crossed out. So you run the risk of not registering it, especially if you've got an accidental little mark in one of the others. If then you decide, after doing that, you've got the wrong answer, please run a line through it. Again, that is all you need. You are selecting your correct answer afterwards. Simplicity is the best here, don't overcomplicate it, but we were looking for B as your answer. And then for question 1.2, the answer was D. Okay, moving on then to Bradley. I think fingers crossed we should have talked a little bit about Bradley in class either way. So in terms of what the question is asking, as we're reading through it, we're going to highlight our key terms. So social learning theory refers to the role of mediational processes in learning. Referring to Bradley's experience, explain the role of these mediational processes. So now we know what we are looking for. What we can do is read our STEM with mediational processes in mind. Just to remind us, we're going to write attention, retention. Retention does not have two T's. See, I thought this was a really good idea, doing a video sort of broadcast thing, but all I'm doing is exposing my own inability to write or read. Attention, retention, reproduction, and then motivation. So now we know what we're looking for is attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. We can find it in this STEM. So we can say, well, clearly if he's keen to play well, he's got motivation. If he's watching carefully, then he's paying attention. He is retaining the information if he thinks about it. You can't think about something unless you can remember it. And then he's wondering whether or not he can do the same, which is all about your reproduction. So now all we've got to do is, a mediational process is dot, dot, dot. So a mediational process is attention, retention, reproduction, motivation. This is when we focus on an event, when we remember the information, when we are capable of reproducing it, when we want to reproduce it. This is shown by Bradley being keen to play well, meaning he is motivated. Bradley watching carefully, which means that he is clearly paying attention. We're quoting back directly from the stem. It makes it crystal clear that we know our stuff. We've got number 3 then, and I think this one was one of the biggest struggles when it came to this paper. Knowledge of Wundt on the whole is quite a touchy one because it's not the biggest part of the spec, but it might come up. So it's asking you to describe. We know then it's only going to ask for A01. What knowledge do we have on Wundt? Well, we know that he's the father of psychology. That's probably not credit worthy, but it's just a nice little introduction to you to get started with, because then you can say he's the father of psychology because he had the first lab. Well, why is that important? The first lab is important because for the first time it helps us to study psych behaviors objectively. Now, if we're studying psychology objectively for the first time, we are testing it. We are doing something that's not been done before. Because we're taking psychology from a philosophy, a way of thinking, to an actually testably scientific concept. Well, what else do we know about him? We know that we used introspection. So introspection is the way of studying internal mental behaviors. Or internal mental processes. It's how Wundt studied what's going on inside our mind. As a big forerunner to the cognitive process, that's exactly what he did. And then we can write that. We can say a forerunner to cognitive. We can say that he is sort of an inspiration to the cognitive approach because he is the individual who sort of guided how the cognitive psychologists see the world and how they test it. And the first person to actually do something with internal mental processes. And then as a nice summary sort of point, we're going to drag all that together and say first person to test, which means first person to do controlled, reliable research. This question was probably one of the trickier ones. The mark scheme is pretty particular on it, so I marked it quite harsh as well. But I wanted to see somewhere something about a laboratory study. I wanted to see somewhere something about introspection and a definition. That's what you needed to access those marks. Okay, question 4 then. Briefly explain one strength and one limitation of the cognitive approach. This was a really easy question. Just simply, well, we know either way, we're going for one strength and one limitation. So that's all that we're going to get credit for. So, one strength, what am I going to say? A good thing in psychology is that often it's testable. I'm going to go, instead of testable, with the idea that it has practical applications, just to show that actually everything that we do, almost every research, practical applications is a useful evaluation point to go with. One issue, on the other hand, is that it's all about internal mental processes, and so it can't always be tested. So we're going to go point, explain, therefore. That will be our structure for this evaluation point. Our point is that there are practical applications to this research. Pure and simple, that is all we're saying, because that is all we really need, that our simplest point that we could possibly make. There are practical applications, but then, okay, let's talk about what they are. The cognitive approach has been used to improve memory, study brain physiology, improve processing, teaching. And then therefore, I'm simply rounding it off by saying therefore, the cognitive approach can is a useful approach to improving how, for instance, we teach students, resulting in more intelligent and productive students. It does not have to be all that wild or all that glitzy glamoury. It just has to be a good thing to do with the cognitive approach. And similarly, if we're studying internal mental processes, what we're doing is we're studying something we can't possibly see. If we can't see it, it's very hard to test it. If we can't test it, then it's not falsifiable. And that's our struggle there. So I think on the whole, again, they were very well answered. Just break it down into a 2 and 2 question. So you're getting 2 marks for each. And if you look at it like that, you can see how simple your evaluation points have to be. Just 2 marks for an evaluation point does not mean that you need the most complex thing. So outline the psychodynamic approach. We're going to highlight outline and discuss one or more difference between the psychodynamic approach and the humanistic approach. So outline the psychodynamic approach. What do we know about the psychodynamic approach? We know about the id, the ego, and the superego. We also know about consciousness and unconsciousness and preconsciousness. And then if we're being really safe, we can talk about psychosexual stages. That's our AO1. We're also being asked to discuss, which is AO3 and AO1. So one or more difference between the psychodynamic approach and the humanistic approach. This is essentially a compare question. It's a really difficult thing to structure. So what we're being asked to do is take the psychodynamic approach, compare it with the humanistic approach, and come out with an evaluation. That's quite difficult. I think our outline bit is quite straightforward, but what we're being asked to do is to compare these two through evaluating the psychodynamic approach. Well, if we're going to evaluate a psychodynamic approach, one of the easiest things to go for is psychic determinism. The psychodynamic approach argues that people are determined by their unconscious mind. Their behavior is guided by the unconscious mind. As a direct contrast to that, humanism argues free will. Now, that's all well and good, and I think many of you sort of gave that little description, but you need to give me more. Psychic determinism comes from Freud arguing that the unconscious mind promotes our behavior either through defense mechanisms or through our childhood experiences guiding us, or through fixation at the psychosexual stages. Humanism has none of that because it's very big on the idea that nothing truly motivates your behavior aside from you. What you want and your push to make yourself better. And you choose to travel through the Maslow's hierarchy of stages. That has to be the contrast, and make sure you're defining both. Think of it again as 4 and 4. So 4 marks for your AO1 understanding of Freud. 4 marks come as your comparison. So you don't, again, need to make all that much noise. You just need to be able to say your AO1 is and your AO3 is. Okay, approaches section. To be honest with you, a lot of you answered that quite well. It was actually quite a tough section, I thought, but I think through practice we've gotten ourselves to a point where we know how we answer those questions, which is really, really impressive. Biopsych then, we were looking at the role of adrenaline in the fight or flight. Once again, we've got outline and we've got adrenaline. So, what does adrenaline do in the fight or flight response? Adrenaline starts the fight or flight response. Adrenaline starts the fight or flight response by being released by the adrena medulla. Once it gets released by the adrena medulla, it does several things. It gets your heart beating. It gets your blood pumping. And it also stops digestion. I need those examples in order for there to be a reasonable understanding of what adrenaline does. Not only does it make things go faster, it also stops things. So essentially it starts the fight or flight response. Somewhere in your answer I needed the term fight or flight, so it stimulates someone for being on a fight or flight response. And then the fact that it comes from the adrenal medulla and then what it does. I wasn't all that picky with this question. As long as you illustrated a good amount of knowledge, that's all I need. This 16 marker we've looked at several times now, so I'm going to skim over it. Again, I've got my highlighter. Robert suffered a stroke at the age of 55. Well, actually, do you know what? I'm going to read this bit in a second because it doesn't mean anything to me unless I know what the question is asking. So I'm going to start with discuss how knowledge of hemispheric lateralization and language centers in the brain help us to understand our cases such as Robert. Refer to Robert's case in your answer. So I know that there's going to be AO1 and AO3 as there is with all 16 markers, and AO2 as well. Hemispheric lateralization, well, that's Sperry, and the language centers, that is Broca. So the information that I need to get in is Sperry and Broca, or Wernicke's. I actually don't know just yet because I haven't read the stem. And I also need to talk about Sperry in terms of brain lateralization. So Robert suffered a stroke at the age of 55. After the stroke, he was paralyzed down his right side. Great. Well, Sperry tells us that if he's paralyzed down his right side, then it's got to be the left side of his brain that struggles, because the right side controls everything here and the left side controls everything here. Though he could move his left arm and leg easily, so great. We know then that his right side is perfectly fine. He could clearly understand what was said to him, but was unable to produce any speech. So, in terms of our planning, at AO1, we've got knowledge about hemispheric lateralization, hem-lat. Right is right is your visuospatial, and left is language. Now, when left is language, specifically, we are looking at Broca and Wernicke's area. And with Broca and Wernicke's area, we can see that he was unable to produce language. The inability to produce language is all about Broca. So Broca's is what's injured. However, because he can clearly understand it, Wernicke's is fine. Now onto Sperry's bit about hemispheric lateralization. So we've seen that his right side is paralyzed, is controlled by the left side of the brain. And then the left is controlled by the right. So, what do we know then? We know that his left side is language. Specifically, he has injured his Broca's area. We know that because he's unable to produce any speech. We also know that he has he's paralyzed down his left side because his right side is perfectly fine. And Sperry demonstrated that your right side of your brain controls your left side. In terms of evaluation, well, what evidence do we have here? Well, for Broca, we've got tan. And then for Sperry, we've got his sort of split brain patients. So automatically we've got 2 bits of supporting research, Broca's tan and Sperry's split brain. Now easily what we can say is, however, this is a case study. Or, however, these people all had seizures. And that easily gives us 4 evaluation points. We've also got Peterson, who did his brain scans and demonstrated that hemispheric lateralization is a thing. So in terms of our planning, we just need 3 basic points applied with quotations, and then I'm going to aim for 5 evaluation points. These 5 will be done with a PET structure. Okay, moving on then. We've got our customary evaluation, our customary research methods question that has come in our subject section. You have to be prepared for this because I have a sneaky feeling this is going to come up more and more often. So explain one problem with the design of this study and suggest ways of dealing with this problem. A psychologist wanted to test the effect of biological rhythms on the ability to solve maths problems. She used a random sample formed of 2 groups each of 20 students. So a random sample, 2 groups, each of 20 students. Automatically, if it is a random sample, we cannot control for participant variables. It may be that one group is simply better at maths. So she tested one group on a set of maths problems at 3 a.m. in the morning. The other group was tested on another set of maths problems. We have no evidence that these maths problems are the same difficulty, so in order to make it a standardized procedure to increase our reliability, we should probably make it the same kind of maths problems, or the same maths problems. Now, we've got to explain one problem and design of the study. The second part is suggest one way of dealing. If you do not suggest a way of dealing with the study, you do not get your full quota of marks. So you need to make sure you're reading the question and doing that. So you might talk about your participant variables via a random sample. And your natural sort of repair to that would be, okay, why don't we use a stratified sample, because that way we're not going to have this random problem that we've had. And then you'd have to explain how specifically this researcher could use a stratified sample. Okay, now we've just finished our research methods question. Naturally, we have to move on to research methods. So question 1, now with research methods, what I would say is it's best to read your STEM first, just because it helps you think about things in a more sort of objective way when you are reading the rest, and then come back to it, because your answers will all be in here. Research methods is fairly intuitive if you get that your answers will be in here and you're not scared by your key terms. Should the hypothesis be directional? Most of you were bang on in saying no, the hypothesis should not be directional. There is no evidence in this STEM that there is any previous research in this area. Your hypothesis is directional if you know which way your results are going to go. You only know which way they're going to go if there's been research on the area. Alternatively, if there's no research, realistically they could go